Hello, my friends, and I hope you're having a fantastic day. So, I saw this article a few days ago, but there are a couple of other things I wanted to talk about. But we're here now, and I get to talk about this. I'm actually kind of excited because I have a few ideas that have been bubbling away in my brain that I would like to express. This is on the Eurogamer, and its former PlayStation exec says there's a collapse of creativity in the industry, and that relying on blockbusters is a death sentence. And he's right. You can't just rely on big game after big game after big game to keep the industry alive, because these big games aren't very innovative. It's the same way you can't rely on box office movies to keep movies alive. If people aren't going to the mid-tier okay-ish movies, movie theaters are going to suffer, obviously. With the AAA studios taking, at this stage, 10 years to develop a game, their game absolutely has to make bank. And there's other things I want to talk about in regards to that. But first, let's get further into the article. One of the main points he makes in this article in regards to creativity is that back in the day, risk tolerance was higher. For those who may not know what risk tolerance is, in regards to making a game, you invest so much money and the people are, at that point, willing to let you go so far in terms of how much risk they're willing to let you take, because they want to see the reward back on that money. It's about, will taking this risk make me back that money I just dropped on you? When games were more creative and developed more quickly, they would say, hey, you know what? Yeah, let me give you this money because I'm sure we can see a quick turnaround on this. And then the quick turnaround didn't happen. It drug out forever. And it cost more money. And then the game came out and it might have broken even. It might have made a little bit of money. And of course, then risk tolerance dropped. Shawn Layden said, today, the entry cost for making a AAA game is in the triple-digit millions now, he continued. I think, naturally, risk tolerance drops. And you're looking at sequels. You're looking at copycats because the finance guys who draw the line say, well, if Fortnite made this much money in this amount of time, my Fortnite knockoff can make this much money in that amount of time. We're seeing a collapse of creativity in games today with studio consolidations and the high cost of production. And of course, this is part of the problem. First, just because you make a sequel or a knockoff doesn't mean you're going to make the same amount of money in that amount of time. And it's actually reasonably logical to know that just because your game imitates this other game, it's not guaranteed to make that money. Especially when you're talking about a game like Fortnite or other games that take a lot of investment from the players, because they're not going to, at that point, drop that game and move to the other game. In some ways, gaming is like books and comics, where the more people who are making these things, people will buy these games and then they will buy other games because they finished them. But at the same time, there are certain subsets of games, namely competitive games like Fortnite, games with lots of collectibles that are multiplayer, that really have more of an encompassing effect on people. They don't want to spend all their time in this game and then go to that game and have to start all over. So what game you're talking about specifically in regards to this makes a big deal. If you're going to make Fortnite knockoff, you're going to have to do something different from Fortnite that will attract the Fortnite players, because generally the Fortnite players have spent a lot of time grinding for their skins, for their emotes, or they've spent real money getting those things and they don't want to lose them and start a new game. You have to provide them with something that loss will be acceptable to them. Unlike a single player game, for example, where a person will play the single player game. Some people will grind it for months, doing everything they possibly can in the game. But then they will finish that game and they will move on to the next game. The people who are likely to stay in one single player game for years at a time are much smaller than those who are likely to stay in a multiplayer game for years at a time, just because they don't provide the same incentives. And this is one of those ways you can tell that a bunch of gamers have gotten into the top of gaming, because they don't understand these basic little things that, hey, if I'm going to make a game that requires a lot of devotion, I'm going to be trying to steal the types of players who want to put a lot of devotion into a game. And a lot of those players right now already have a lot of options. In order to actually capture this audience, I have to offer something more. I can't just copy them. Now, a single player game, however, can afford to more or less copy a lot of basic things from another game, because you finish a single player game, most gamers will then go out and pick up another. And a game being similar to another game they've already played, without being a direct copy, will encourage them to do so, because they already know they enjoy that game loop. Layden goes on to say that AAA is gone, which he described as a threat to the ecosystem. Yes, not having that in-between studio, because right now you have, the basic indie gaming studio. You used to have the in-between A class studio, which was a smaller studio working on a slightly smaller budget game, but would still make a good game. And then you would have, of course, the AAAs. Now, there are still AA's out there. I would call Sandfall Games, the developers of Clair Obscur, Expedition 33, a AA studio. Now, I don't know if they meet the technical definition. I'm not entirely sure of the technical definition. They are not as big as a AAA studio. They don't have the same money or input as a AAA studio, but they are still putting out a game that I think looks amazing, personally, without having the same resources as an actual AAA studio. But they are still not quite indie base. They're not 5-10 people working in a studio making a game. I believe they have slightly more than that. So for me, those are the in-between now. I think part of what's going to happen in the future is we are going to have to re-examine how we classify these things, because I think having just the indie, AA, AAA spectrum isn't going to be enough. In order to help people really decide what kind of game they're going for, we're probably going to have to look at refining and redefining some of these things. And especially now with so many more tools out there, where an indie game developer can literally be just one person building an entire game. From the back end to the front end to the music to the characters, they build the whole thing themselves. That is something that happens now. It used to take more than that, because it used to be so much harder to do. But of course, as I've said in the past, with that comes the fact that you have a lot of bad stuff that you then have to wade through. So in response to that, to top it off, we're going to have to invent new systems to help us find new games that are out there that we are interested in. Used to be, you might be able to rely on the games journos for this, because they would occasionally see something, a little new, a little quirky, and bring it forward. But not so much anymore. And I probably will, once again, go back to picking a day of the week where I talk about new games that I find the people can check out. Those videos, unfortunately, don't ever do too well. But at the same time, if we don't start doing something individually to find some way to support these, to get these out there, to get more attention to them, then it's never going to happen. For all we know, the next really cool development in gaming could already be out there somewhere, but because no one's looking beyond the surface, we're not finding anything. We're not seeing it. And Layden actually mirrors this point to some degree when he says, now, if we can get just a bit more interest and excitement and exposure for these lower budget, but super creative and super unusual types of games, I'd like to see more of that. Because if we're just going to rely on the blockbusters to get us through, I think that's a death sentence. AA games can bring the new thing and can be developed far quicker than AAA games, said Layden. Most importantly, though, they must seek unique ideas and not monetization. Monetization is definitely something we currently over-focus on. Not obviously as gamers, but the larger studios do. Because when you have this budget of $200, $300, $400, $800 million, you have to make that back somehow. Now, I do think part of what they need to do is shrink these budgets. And a major way to do that is, I'm sorry, but when I hear things about like a gaming studio having an in-house barista or private lunches, some of those luxuries has got to go, guys. This isn't the time where you can eat like the fatted calf. It's time for the sacrifice, unfortunately. At some point, these things have to be cut. There's a lot of jobs probably a lot of administrative glut that has occurred, because when people are making that money, they always find a way to spend that money. And because they find a way to spend that money, it's much harder for them to cut it back when it's time. We can echo the same thing in government. When you look at a government office, something most people may not know is they spend every dollar of their budget. They find a way to spend it, because if they don't spend every dollar of their budget, they're not rewarded. They're not applauded. They're punished by having that budget taken away. Thus, government often incentivizes overspending. And I imagine in many ways the same thing has happened within these gaming companies. Because if you know that you can get this perk through the company, and the company will pay for it, instead of being rewarded for publishing a great game that costs them less, you end up punished the next time around, because the company looks at it and says, well, they don't need that much money. Twitter is actually an excellent example of what happens when you cut people who don't really need to be there. And I know there are probably people who will listen to this video and say, well, Twitter's not as good as it used to be, or whatever. Twitter still operates. It operates fine. I personally don't have many issues with it, if ever. There are plenty of issues you can talk about with Twitter, but right now, in terms of operational issues, it works. It's really quite simple. And they cut 80% of the people who work there, meaning a company that was admittedly losing money has a better chance to now make money. Now, does that suck for the people who lost their jobs? It always does. It sucks when people have to lose their jobs because the people who are in charge went overboard and didn't thoroughly think through their choices. You can always overhire, and then you have to go through the punishment of firing people. It's not fair to the people you're firing, but it is what it is. And the funny thing is you can really see that these large AAA studios are looking for some of these imaginative, creative games by some of the flops, believe it or not, we've had recently. Look at the rumors behind Concord, where they were talking about how Concord was supposed to build into this multimedia thing where it crossed genres, and it was on TV, and it was on, it's supposed to be in TV and it's supposed to be part of other games, and this whole thing that they could build out and make money off of. And then this Unknown 9, it's the same thing. They bought it with the intent of having this universe that they were going to build off of and make into a franchise. And when these people came to them and sold them these ideas, I do have to imagine that was part of the pitch. It's, hey, we've got this really great idea, and it's basics, so we know these concepts work with other games, but we just need your hundreds of millions of dollars to pull it off. And then, of course, we have to bring in these consultants to make sure that this goes well, because this is hundreds of millions of dollars, We need to make sure we pay the consultants to make sure we're doing this right. And before you know it, you have so many fingers in the pie of this gaming idea that the original idea is lost. And what you're left with is a pile of crap that doesn't make anybody happy. This is definitely part of the problem in current gaming. Large budgets, honestly, and I'm sure there will be probably some game dev someday that finds this video and vehemently disagrees with me what a day is like at BioWare or something. And if it didn't include going to some kind of in studio barista with some kind of elaborate catered lunch at some point, I would be shocked. I genuinely would be, because that kind of seems like the type of thing that they like to spend money on. And just think back to when Google was in its heyday, and the fact that they had, playrooms and food for free and all sorts of those things. And then they had to start cutting that stuff back, partly because the government got involved, but we don't need to go into all that. But that is part of why I keep repeating over and over again, what we really need to see now is we need to see people who are passionate about gaming. We need to see people who are passionate about finding something new and what they want to present in terms of their art, as opposed to how am I going to make the maximum amount of money off of this product I've created. And while it's good to think about the money you are going to make off the product you create, It's also very important to have the passion into that product you create. Both things can exist. They are not mutually exclusive, except for the fact it seems like most of the people who create for passion don't understand. And those who are interested in monetization don't seem to understand how to produce with passion. But guys, what do you think? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you see other problems outside of what I've talked about? I'm always learning and finding something new to think about down in the comments, and I really appreciate you guys for that. So look forward to reading what you have to say. Thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. Please like, comment, subscribe, and turn on the notifications. If you really liked it, you can feel free to share it around, and I will catch you later.